Okay. I'm looking for a brisket. I'm doing choice at Costco. Couple things I'm looking for. I want this as uniform as possible. I don't like that. Also, you kind of want the flop. When you hold it, you want the meat to be able to be floppy on the flat. Also on the flat, you want the meat to be at least 1 inch all the way around, and you can trim it, but you don't want to waste a lot of meat. So I'm looking for 1 inch in uniform. All that crap I don't care about because I'm going to trim. Now I'm looking for any big chunks, but I want it pretty uniform. What I don't want is one like this, where it's lost a lot of the cap here, and it doesn't have any flop.
So I went with a prime cut. Again, this was mostly just because what they had for the choice options weren't really the best ones for the day. But what I did look for was, again, a well marbled, and then kind of have that flex in the flat. Before you start your prep and your trimmings, a couple things I have ready. Want to make a little foil bowl. This is for some of the trimmings because I like to make my own tallow. So I'll put some of the trimmings here. So I'll have this off to the side. You want to make sure that your brisket is cold. It's easier to trim the fat and the meat when it's cold. That's definitely the most important point. So after you get it back from the grocery store, make sure you throw it in the fridge for an hour or so at least, so it's nice and chilled. It'll make it easy. Next, you want to have some really sharp knives. All right, not sponsored, but this is from my friend Jordan Berthelot, and he made this like kind of skinning knife or boning knife that I like to use, and then there's just my Fred Meyer special. So have those ready. We're gonna get this thing unpackaged and blot off all the blood and any of the extra moisture, and then get to trimming. Okay. Let's turn this open. While I'm at this, I'll talk about the cutting board I'm using. Is like a all-in-one cutting board prep tool that my neighbor actually got me for Christmas. And it works really well because you can pop up the sides and use it to brine, do everything really. Okay, so now for the trim. The mentality for trimming the brisket is aerodynamics. All right, one of my good buddies taught me this, and basically when you're thinking about it, you want to think about smoke being able to smoothly flow over the top of the brisket. So on your smoker, mine is a pellet smoker with the exhaust off to one side. So I try to think about, I'm going to put the point towards that exhaust, and I want the smoke to flow over the top of it smoothly out through that exhaust. So as you're trimming, keep that in mind, that it doesn't necessarily have to be perfectly pretty, but you want to make it a nice smooth surface for the smoke to flow through evenly. A couple things too, like you see there's a big cut in here. Like I'm going to try and even that out and go from there. So I like to just start around the point, kind of get this mohawk and this really hard fat. Any hard fat I'm not going to save in the trimmings. It doesn't really render very well, and it won't create a lot of tallow. I might put a few little chunks in there, but really I'll just chunk the hard fat. We want to get all that hard fat off, and I like to leave about a 1/4 inch fat cap across the entire top where possible. So that's going to just be some feeling by hand and some good trimming to leave about a 1/4 inch of fat cap across the whole brisket. Trimming is something you can do in 5 minutes, and you can spend an hour doing. It doesn't really, that's just up to your OCD for the day and how much you want to trim off, but you can't put it back on once you take it off. So I always say just do small slivers. You don't have to do big chunks. especially as you're trying to see where the fat is and is not. As you're cutting down, feel free to really feel it. Again, that really hard fat is not going to render on the meat, especially on the point. And so you really want to get all that off. It's okay to trim off some of the actual meat too. You'll see like this is kind of sticking up awkward over here. I don't want sharp edges. Sharp edges are going to lead to char and burnt meat over a long cook. We're looking at 8+ hours on the cook. So anything sharp and pointy like this, so it's kind of skinny here, that's just going to burn over an 8-hour cook. And that's not going to be the finish that you want. It's going to be burnt meat. You can probably see it maybe here because the meat is really cold. It's cutting much more like marble versus having to hack through it and have it flex on you a bunch. What I'm doing here on this side, you'll see there's like some overlap of the fat onto the actual beef, onto the meat. And I'm just trying to start smoothing that out. So again, nice rounded edge. Okay. Let's keep going here. So what I was saying is, on the fat cap from the butcher, sometimes you'll have little holes. Nothing you can really do about that. You're going to find more imperfect briskets, especially in the Costco type environment, than you are perfect ones. So you just make do and don't sweat it. The thing with smoking barbecue is that I don't think there's ever a perfect smoke and a perfect cut. That's the fun, is realizing it's all kind of an experiment. Like today I'm going to be trying something a little bit different with the brine, a little bit different process. That's kind of the joy of it too, is just figuring out what works and doesn't work. A little quarter size, a $50 size spot like that, it's not going to do anything. If you stress about it, that just makes it not fun. Sometimes around the point, there's a lot of just floppy looking cuts. Again, I'll just cut all that off and round it off. So on the flat, what I'm looking at here, sometimes it's not very uniform thickness across the flat from one side to the other. When I'm picking them, I try and find one that's as even as possible. But sometimes this side is really, really thin, and you can just round that corner off and cut that piece off. Again, the biggest reason is, like this one, I'm just gonna round a little bit with some straight cuts. So what I don't want to happen is an uneven cook. This is basically to be done much faster, and then it just starts drying out that whole portion of the flat. See, it's not perfect, but it's good enough. I just made it a little more even and a little bit thicker. Getting that closer to about 1 inch of meat versus that almost 1/4 inch that it was tapered down to. Okay, I'm gonna start working on the bottom. So a couple things. On the bottom, you normally find this harder fat cap here. I'm not going to trim it all the way down. I'm not going to like pocket out the meat. I'm just going to make it as flush as possible. On the bottom side of the brisket, you can spend an hour getting rid of all the silver skin. I'm going to try and get as much of it gone as possible. It's not going to kill or change or cook too much. But again, just for when I put the brine, especially dry brine, my seasoning on, I don't want that silver skin making a barrier. And then this hardened like fat strip here, you don't want to carve away and make your meat not aerodynamic. So I'm just going to trim it down as close to and best as possible here. Also, there's like a little pocket here that separates the two, the flat from the point, the two muscles. There's a fat strip that runs through it. This is the end of it. It's also kind of hard. I'm going to trim that out too. You can see and hear the difference, how hard that fat is. That goes in the trash. Don't be afraid when you're using cutting the meat. A little technique I like to use: get your hand underneath it and bend it up. That helps you keep a nice flat surface, so you're not stabbing into the meat. Helps you trim along the surface you're going for, especially along the edges. On the bottom side here, there's a little cut from the butcher. When we get to it, when it comes to the actual brine, what you don't want to do is open that up, and especially sometimes you'll see big gouges. Your brisket's not ruined. You don't need to throw it away. What you don't want to do though is open it up, get that binder in there. I'm going to be using mustard. You don't want to get the binder in there and get your seasoning in there, because it's just going to create an air pocket, and it's not going to help cook the meat. It can create burns and not keep that uniform cook. This was like a 18-pound brisket to start, and I'll probably trim 2 to 3 pounds off of it. You'll see the competition barbecuers, they'll turn this thing into just like a medallion, and take 50% of it off. I'm not going to do all that. I don't care about competition appearance. I just care about nice, even cook, getting the bark I want, that smoothness. That's the important part. If you have a bunch of bumps and ridges, your bark's not going to want to set up perfect. You get that nice picture look. Getting the silver skin off, in my opinion, also helps with that appearance. They should make like a meat planer just for brisket, so you can just like strip off the top instead of having to do all this. But again, cold meat and a sharp knife go a long way for this portion. At least if you're a little more meticulous like I am. Okay, so you can really start to see that big cap I'm making just nice and smooth. I'm not going to be digging into the side of the beef. Sometimes on the edges, when it's packaged meat, you'll see like a little bit of oxidation. It'll be gray. That's just from the sealing process and packaging process from that particular butcher. For aesthetics, as long as the meat isn't bad, for aesthetics, I like to trim off. There's none on this one, but I'll just trim that edge and get that oxidation off. Again, I just want to give the smoke a perfect uniform surface as best as possible to adhere to and absorb into. Yeah, this one, like I said, there's still some silver skin on here. I'm not going to care too much. I just want to get the clumps off. And I'm feeling it constantly to feel for that smoothness. Again, this is the side that's going to be flat on my grill. I'm going to be fat cap up. So I want it to be sitting perfectly on the smoker. Okay. You can see made like a nice band through there, but it's nice and flat now. I got a lot of that hardened fat out. I'm just going to go back over the top, fat cap, clean up a little bit. I'm basically done with the trimming now. Now it's just a little bit of cleanup, and then I'm going to get it in to wet brine. I'm going to trim a little bit of this mohawk off. See, it's still kind of... Okay. And that's basically the trim. A nice and smooth surface. All right, on top. It's best to 1/4 inch of fat cap remaining on the top. There's a few sections, of course, from just the butcher cut. That's fine. All right, we really just don't want deep, big deposits. And again, feel the fat, so you can kind of, as you do this a lot, you'll get better feel for like where that 1/4 inch is. Like definitely that was a little bit thicker spot there. So I can trim down here, but you don't have to go crazy. Get a little bit more on the top. That's better than not having enough. It just might affect that cooking a little bit. But again, the big picture here is aerodynamic. Think airflow on top and bottom. Okay, that's the trim. Okay, so this brisket, this is the experiment part. For this one, I'm going to do a 24-hour wet brine and then a 24-hour dry brine. Again, I just want to see what it does. Just kind of an experiment. Normally, I would just do at least a 12-hour minimum dry brine, and that's just, you know, my I like to use Meat Church seasonings, Meat Church, salt, pepper, garlic, really. For this one, we're gonna do cherry cola or cherry Dr. Pepper, all right, and then I'm gonna add Worcestershire sauce. Say that 5 times fast. Some pepper, fresh minced garlic, fresh, has to be fresh, and then a little bit of cayenne. Again, my idea and just some YouTube videos I've seen, just add some more flavor, adds a little more tenderness, especially if it was a choice cut and it wasn't as marbled as this one is. It might help the meat a little bit. But again, you can always try. The idea of the cola too, don't worry about the sugar. You want whole sugar soda. If you use zero, it's not going to do the same thing. You'll know if like you're glazing ribs and stuff, you don't want sugar free, because that sugar is what helps set up a nice cook, a nice bark. And plus it'll burn off. We're going to pat it dry. This is just really to get in there and hopefully tenderize the meat even more than what a typical long cooked brisket gets to be. All right, this is where this little bucket thing that I got, this like 3-in-1, works really well for prepping, because then I just pop the sides up. Now I can brine it. All right, I might need to add a little bit more. A few tablespoons of Worcestershire. Again, not a whole lot. You want to taste the meat, all right? And you don't need a lot of extra. Just some cayenne. I like a little bit of spice in my meat. I don't know what this is going to do, if it does anything, especially since most of this is going to be pat off. Fresh minced garlic. Fresh. Very important. Better flavor. Let's do a little bit of. For your pepper on your cooks, you want 16 mesh black pepper. Okay, that helps with setting up the bark. So I'm going to use this for the actual, the seasoning and the dry brine, right? Because 16 mesh, the bigger particles in there, it's going to help set up a much better bark than if you just get your typical ground black pepper. Don't ever use that. 16 mesh. I'm going to inject a little bit. Get it all mixed up. Well, it looks like I've got a little hole. Oh, this thing broke. Let's see what I can do. Let's get a new one of these. It broke last time I washed it. So I can hold this thing together. Notice I'm injecting from the bottom side because I don't want to ruin the fat cap. Alright, I think because it's broken, it's not doing that much. I'm going to flip this over now. I'm going to go meat side down. Need a little bit more soda. Just enough to make a mess. Alright, and now I'm going to cover it and put it in the fridge for 24 hours. Okay, it's been 24 hours in the wet brine. This is that cola blend. It smells really good, actually. Real garlicky, some pepper, of course, from what we put in it. I'm going to drain this out, and then I'm going to pat it dry. I'll come back after I drain this all in the sink real quick. Okay, so I drained it out, and what I did actually is a lot of that brine, I put it in Tupperware, and I'm going to save this for the cook. And I'll show you what I do to keep a lot more moisture in the cook for my brisket to really turn out extra juicy, and how I set it up in the smoker. So I'm going to set this off to the side for now. I'll put that in the fridge with it. And then from here, I'm just going to pat this all dry and get it as dry as possible. All right. I made sure I got all that garlic off of there. All right. And I'll pick it off as it comes. This is where I'm a little wasteful as far as paper towels go. But for the dry brine, you want it to really be dry before we put this mustard on. Yeah, all that garlic, get off of there. That actually gave me a good idea for next cook. If I do this garlic again, put it in a seasoning bag so that I can easily pull it all off. Okay, just gonna continue on here. All right, so I flipped it over. I'm gonna start on the bottom side to get all the seasoning on it. Put this down. Just a little bit more. Got a little bit of garlic. Isn't gonna kill anything on the meat. I just, when I cook it in, I don't want that to be the taste on the beef. Don't worry, the color you see is only because, you know, I had it in cherry cola all night. Okay. I'm gonna wash my hands off real quick before I continue. Okay, as far as applying the seasoning and a binder, my go-to, especially for beef, sometimes I'll use Worcestershire, but really my go-to is just regular yellow mustard. All right, you're not gonna taste it. It's just nice and sticky. It cooks well, and it holds it. What I'm gonna apply is, this is a just pre-mixed 60-40 ratio, 60% that 16 mesh black pepper, and then 40% coarse kosher salt. Coarse kosher salt. Coarse, it has to be big pellicles or big you know, pieces of salt. Kosher is important. All right. It should kind of look like that for the mixture. You don't need a lot of salt. And then I'm going to lightly season with the salt and pepper. And then I'm going to go pretty heavy with, this is my favorite full brisket, Meats Church Holy Cow. Sometimes I'll use a couple other ones to add a little bit more like sugar flavor to it. But for this one, it's going to keep it pretty salt and peppery with Holy Cow. I grabbed another one out. Sometimes I'll add Holy Voodoo just as a, it's got a little bit more sugar in it. Salt, sugar, brown sugar, spices, and it just adds a little bit of sweetness to it. You know, especially on the top side, on the fat side, fat cap, I'll add a little bit more seasoning. But on the bottom, I just want it to be a good salt pepper mix, mostly with Holy Cow. All right. I try to keep a glove hand for the spices, and then, you know, a clean hand. Just get that on there. Doesn't have to be really heavy for the binder, okay? Just enough to get a nice uniform coating. Again, remember what I was talking about. If you have butcher cuts, you know, like big incisions and stuff, there's a little one right over here. Try not to get any binder inside of that, okay? We don't want it to be cooking inside the meat. We want it to just be smoking on the outside. The salt will separate from the pepper. You'll start to see it, you know, just the different density. So I've got this container a little full right now, but make sure that you're shaking it up, especially if you see it start to clump and separate. On the edges, kind of use that technique where I kind of drop it onto my hand and run it around the sides. Again, keeping a glove on, not necessary, but then you also don't have the spice smell stuck to you the rest of the day. I had a good amount of garlic smell on my hands all night from yesterday's prep. You don't want to rub it in, pat it. Just slap your meat a little bit, all right, to get a nice good coating. That's pretty good. Doesn't need to be black. You know, you'll see people, you can go with any spice you want that you prefer, you like. Some people will add like that really black coffee ground, and it'll also give you like a faux bark if you put that coffee ground stuff on. I tried it once, didn't really like the taste of it, or even the texture. I like to let the smoker with the pepper do its thing. All right, going over that holy cow. It has more black pepper in it too. So again, don't have to go real heavy. I just want to see that orange, those spices kind of color the meat and fill in the blanks from the salt and pepper mixture that I already put on it. The nice part about brisket, when you get to the finished part of the cook, you know, if people really don't like that heavy spice, one, they don't need to eat your barbecue. But two, you know, you can kind of scratch it off, especially for like kids that don't want a lot of the spice, a lot of the seasoning. Anybody else complaining doesn't deserve what your hard cooked meat. All right, that's pretty good there. Again, just kind of pat it so it adheres. Set that off to the side. Again, I'm gonna go for just a little bit of holy voodoo, just because again, this is more of it has more of like a sugary, sweet taste. And again, I'm just kind of filling in the blanks from that coarser seasoning. Not a lot. Okay. That's kind of how you want it to look. Again, really you just want it uniform, making sure you don't miss, especially around the edges, using that hand technique to get the spots you might have missed. Okay. Let's put this over. Got a little bit of moisture back on it, just from sitting on the... I just ruined that paper towel roll. Okay, that looks pretty good to me. Plenty of seasoning on there. Again, don't be shy with it. It's a big piece of meat. Now from here, I'm gonna get this cleaned up. All right, I'm gonna put it back in the fridge. This is gonna sit now, because my cook is going to be tomorrow. This is gonna sit another 24 hours. Now again, the wet brine is not necessary. That was kind of just an experiment for this cook. But the dry brine, you want a good 24 hours. All right, that's very important, especially for the bark setup. All right, and you want it to be refrigerated. This will be actually open air. I'm not gonna have the lid on it, all right, just so that the fridge can be pulling moisture off of it, and letting all the seasoning really set up on it. So again, 24 hours minimum. That is one of the most important parts for getting a good bark on your brisket. Okay, good morning everybody. It's the morning of the cook. All right, it's bright and early. I got up about 4:30 this morning. Got the smoker started. It's set to 225 today. I'm just going to do a straight 225 cook. I'll talk about what I usually do if I have a larger brisket, but since this is about 12 pounds trimmed, I don't need as much time as I typically would. So I just set it to 225 this morning, and it's been heating up and temperature soaking for about 20-30 minutes now, so it's nice and consistent temperature. I just pulled the brisket out. I like to put it on cold, fresh from the fridge. I like to think it helps with the smoke absorption, and I don't let the meat warm up to room temperature or some of the other things that I've tried. don't like that as much. A couple things ready as well. So I've got my trimmings off to the side to make that tallow. I've got my ThermoPro temperature probes. I like to have, I suggest you have at least 2 probes, one for the point and one for the flat for your cook. I like these, they work really well. There's lots of really nice options too, and even more expensive options. These have been pretty consistent for me. For the spritz, and you'll see what I'll have spray down the brisket about every 30 to 45 minutes for the first few hours. My spritz, I like to go with the simple 50-50 mixture of apple cider vinegar and then some sort of cider beer. Okay, I just picked this one because it was what's available. So I just did a 50-50 mixture and put it in my spray bottle and set it off to the side. Okay. Other thing I noted, I topped off just a little bit of holy cow if I saw there's just a few spots where I didn't like the coverage on the brisket, so I just sprinkled it off. And then if you remember from the brine, I set off to the side all the liquid that I used for the brine. Okay, what I'm going to do with that is on the bottom rack, I like to smoke my brisket on the top rack of my smoker, and so underneath it, what I'm going to do is put this foil tray and add all the moisture, all the liquid that I used for the wet brine. If I didn't do the wet brine, I would still use a tray and put at least at least about a ½ inch of water in there, as well as I'd add either apple juice or apple cider vinegar or something. Really what I care about is just that the moisture that it adds to the smoke, especially on a long smoke and underneath the brisket too. For a pellet smoker, I feel like it helps with making sure there's no hot spots. But the biggest thing is it constantly adds moisture to the cook. And this is one of my best tips to making sure you have that perfect brisket turnout. Okay, so I'm getting ready to walk this out now to the smoker. Let's get it on. Okay, this is the smoker setup. All right, so I've got the brisket on the top rack. I've got the point towards my exhaust side. I've got my trimmings down below to be setting up for tallow. Again, that's just a little foil bowl I made. And then underneath it, I've got my moisture tray, okay? That moisture tray, again, is gonna really help with keeping it really nice and moist and consistent throughout the cook. And again, what I really care about is that smoke is traveling over the aerodynamic, from low to high over that brisket into the exhaust. All right, from there I'm just going to close the lid, and then we're going to check on it about every 30 minutes with spritz. Okay, so I've got the brisket on. I'm going to go relax, drink some coffee, and I'm going to check on it about every 30 to 45 minutes and give it that spritz with the apple cider vinegar mixture. Keep in mind, one of the good sayings, if you're looking, it ain't cooking. All right, so other than the spritz for the first few hours when it's really taking in smoke, you really just want to let the brisket do its thing, and then really start to check on it when it gets closer to that 160 degrees for the stall. One other thing, what I typically would do on a brisket, now today, I'm planning on having dinner later in the evening with some friends, so I started the cook in the morning. The best way that I find to do it if I don't want to wake up early like this, and it's very successful for my cooks, is I will just set it to max smoke on my Traeger, which is about 180 degrees. And then I will just put it on at 10 o'clock, 10, 11 o'clock at night. I'll still spritz it about twice every 30 minutes. And then I go to bed. And I don't wake up until 6, 7 a.m. When I feel like I want to kick the smoker up to 225 and let it cook for the remainder of the day. Usually that works a lot better with bigger briskets too, when I'm over 15 pounds post trim. Again, today I'm cooking a smaller brisket, so I didn't really care too much about how long that it was, how much time I had before the evening dinner. I plan for about a 4-hour rest. Okay, that's where I really think is the sweet spot for a brisket to get that maximum tenderness. So I've got a heater blanket to keep it at 150 degrees or 150 plus degrees. And I really like to let it rest for about 4 hours minimum. Okay, you can get away with a shorter rest if you're in a time crunch, you know, if you've got a harder timeline for food and feeding folks. But 4 to 6 hours, especially on a big brisket, when you're looking at like a 20-pounder, the longer the rest, just the better it turns out, and the more the real tender cook turns out with the longer rest. So again, right now what I'm going to do is just relax, drink my coffee, and wait for the first few spritzes. All right, we'll check back on it soon. Okay, so the first 30 minutes has passed. I've got my apple cider vinegar and cider beer mix ready to go. What I'm going to do is try and open this lid as quickly as possible, and then just get a nice full coating of spritz all over the brisket. I don't want to keep the lid open for very long. I don't want it soaked. I just want a nice good mist over it. And that's all you need. Check back again about 30-45 minutes. All right, number 2. We're back. Okay, number 3. Let's go in for number 4. Okay, spritz number 5. Okay, I really like how that bark is setting up. So at this point, I'm going to reduce the amount I'm spritzing to about once an hour until it gets to the stall. Okay, so I did a little sneak peek, and right now what we're at is what's called the stall, okay? And I'm going to show you here on my 2 probes here. I've got 2 probes in, one's at 165 and one's at 158. And I know it's at the stall because really these numbers haven't moved in 20-30 minutes. Also, if I open the lid here, you'll see that the bark, and what I'm looking for is exactly that color, that texture that I like, and my preference. And you'll see the black is actually in the point, and it's actually showing a higher temp. Sometimes these will flip-flop. Sometimes the flat will be at a lower temp or at a higher temperature than the point, just due to a thinner piece of meat. But every cook is different. There's no perfect science to this. And you know what? I've let it sit now at the stall for enough time where, like I said, I really like that coloration. So what I'm going to do now is pull it off. We're going to foil boat it and get it back on to finish the cook. Okay, so I pulled the brisket off. We were at the stall for 20-30 minutes until the bark got to where I wanted it. And really, because of the method I'm going to use, the bark I'm talking about, the whole, both the bottom and the top, I'm going to leave the top exposed using the foil boat method, or the so the foil boat method, because for me it works really well. I like how it keeps the bark from getting too moist when you fully wrap it, and especially on a smaller brisket, I found that it really turns out just perfect. What I also pulled off was the trimming, okay, and you see there's tallow, or there's, that fat has broken down and it's made that nice golden liquid. Okay, that's that liquid gold that you're gonna want. To do the foil boat method, I have just Reynolds wrap, extra heavy duty. Okay, heavy duty is important because this meat's heavy, and you don't want it getting holes and ripped up. All right.
What I'm going to do is I double layered 2 pieces of this foil, and what I'm going to do is, as tightly as possible, pull up on the side and then roll down the edge away from the meat. Okay? You got to think you don't want sharp edges. Sharp edges are going to cause burns, and really I'm just going to roll it to the top edge of the meat. Okay? On both sides. Making it very tight is important here, okay? So kind of pull it, all right? You want it tight because if it develops air pockets underneath, it can, boil up or start to boil up on you, and you really don't want that, all right? Because it is going to create more fluid and get some liquid underneath it. A little bit of arts and crafts here. Okay. You kind of use the edges to pinch it down. When you pinch it down, it really pulls that that tightness into the foil. Okay. All right, so now you see it's a nice foil boat. I'm leaving the top fully exposed. Okay. So I'm going to set it back on my tray here. Get it ready to go back out onto the grill. All right, so it's going to go back on the smoker. I'm going to put this back into the smoker as well, but before I do that, I'm going to drizzle it over the top. Okay. All right, perfect. Now I'm going to get this back onto the smoker, and it's going to finish to about 203, or really, and I'll talk about it, we're going to get it to probe tender, and then let it rest for a few hours, and it'll be ready to go. Let's get it out there.
Okay, for this cook, I ended up putting some foil on top of it just because I think due to the way I wet brined it, it's just taking a little bit longer to cook. But what I'm going to show you is probe tender, and then we're going to pull it off and let it rest. So I've got the point on one side and the flat on the other. I'm going to show you just with what you're looking for is consistency like warm peanut butter to go through the meat. So into the probe, this goes right in. There's no stickiness. It just goes right in, comes right out. It's kind of how you want it to feel. A couple different spots. And that's probe tender and ready to rest.
Okay, so I pulled the brisket off. It's at probe tender, as I already showed on the previous little clip there. I did wrap the top in foil. Again, it basically hit a second stall, and I think that was due to the wet brine. It was an experiment to see what it does to the cook. But as you can see, the nice part about doing a foil boat is the bark is perfect. It is exactly how I want it, and it kept it through the whole cook. Sometimes when I've wrapped it, it ends up getting too much moisture, and then I have, then it doesn't, all that work you put into it feels like it goes to waste, at least for the appearance, and some of the texture too. Now what I'm going to do now is rest it, and I'm going to rest it in peach paper, and then from there I'm going to put it in a thermal bag, and in that thermal bag I'm going to put into a cooler, and I'm going to let it rest for at least 2 to 4 hours, depending. So for the peach paper, I'll set this aside. Any old peach paper will do. Do the size of the brisket. I just double layered this. I'm gonna take some of the apple cider vinegar and cider beer just to wet the paper to make it more malleable. And then where I'm gonna put the brisket on this side, I'm gonna take some of the tallow that I still had on the smoker, and I'm gonna put a little bit down. As it rests, it's gonna reabsorb juices. It's gonna make a little bit of a mess. But that's okay because it's going to be in a bag. You can see here, it's
still a little rigid because it's so hot. As it cools down, that will change. Let's see. Oh. Stuck my thumb in it. Some of this juice is back on top. Set this off to the side. Okay, from here, we're just going to fold it up. Really, you just want it to make a nice tight blanket on it. All right, wrap the back side. On the edges, you want this tight. Okay, so I'm going to fold it. Kind of like wrapping Christmas present. They all wrap a little different. Once, twice, okay. And from there, really, you can just leave it 2 wraps for the excess. All I do is pull it over. Wrap it inside. Okay. Now it's nice and packaged up. From there, just going to put it into a nice little resting bag. It's floor lined, it's insulated. Okay, it keeps everything nice and clean once you put it in the cooler as well. And then from there, into the cooler, and I'm also going to put a towel over the top of that just to make sure it's more insulated. And then it's going to sit for a couple hours. Okay, so now it's rested a few hours. Let's unwrap this thing and check it out. Still very warm. I'm going to cut it into 2 sections, from the point on the left and flat on the right. I'm just going to cut it down the middle. Alright. Let's see how this... You can see right away just how juicy the sucker is. Let's do a nice cut here. Alright, now here's the flat. And you can see this falls right in half. Fiber pulls. This thing's falling right apart. This is perfect. A nice long rest is really the good trick here. This off to the side. This is so good. Now let's check out the point. And you can just see even from the burnt end just how juicy the sucker is. This just pulls right apart. Perfectly juicy. Moist. Falls right apart. Perfect. And that's how you do a brisket. I'm going to cut this up, serve it, and we're going to make this all go away now. All right, have a good one.